Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. We're still looking at Deuteronomy chapter 16. In the last couple of sessions, we've seen this chapter contains the instructions on the 3 pilgrim festivals that Israel was to observe. Now, yesterday we looked at the Passover. Today we're going to look at what is called the Feast of Weeks. And this is in verses 9 through 12 of chapter 16. Count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Then celebrate the festival of weeks to the Lord your God by giving a free will offering in proportion to the blessings the Lord your God has given to you. And rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. You and your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live among you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, so follow carefully these decrees. Now this is the Festival of Weeks. It would occur 7 weeks after the beginning of the barley harvest. Now the barley harvest would sort of coincide with the time of the Passover. It's in the spring. The barley comes in first. And when you first begin to harvest the barley, that's what it means by when you put the sickle to the standing grain. When you first begin to harvest the barley, count off 7 weeks. That's why it's called a Festival of Weeks. Count off 7 weeks, and then on the next day, the 50th day, you will have this festival of rejoicing before the Lord. This festival is also called the Festival of Harvest because at the time it was ongoing, you were beginning the wheat harvest. Now, the barley harvest begins in the spring around the time of Passover. So you count off 7 weeks, and then about the time the Festival of Weeks is beginning, now the wheat harvest is coming in. And so it's called also the Festival of Harvest because you present wheat to the Lord as you begin the harvest. It's also called Pentecost from the number 50. Remember, you're counting off 7 weeks, and on the 50th day, you celebrate this festival before the Lord. So it's also called Pentecost. So all these names are connected with it, the Festival of Weeks, or the Festival of Harvest, or Pentecost. Now, this is one of the pilgrim festivals. All that are able will gather at the place of worship, where the tabernacle is, later the temple, and there they will present their offering to the Lord. Notice they are to give a free will offering in proportion to the way the Lord has blessed you. You know, our offerings to the Lord are always free will offerings. We give of our heart to the Lord because he has blessed us. And in measure of the blessings we have received, so we give the free will offering. Also notice this festival is a time of great joy. Of great joy. Rejoice before the Lord your God at all the things he has done for you. You've already had the barley harvest, it's complete. And now the wheat harvest is beginning. It is a time to rejoice and to know the joy of the Lord. You know, when we come before the Lord to worship, it is a time of great joy. It should be. The last verse in these instructions about the Festival of Weeks says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt. In other words, remember that God redeemed you. He was the one who set you free. So rejoice in all of his blessings. Now, of course, this festival has very great significance for we Christians, for it occurs on Pentecost. On Pentecost, this is Pentecost. And we remember in Acts chapter 2, it was on Pentecost that the Holy Spirit fell on the disciples gathered together. Jesus had told them at the ascension to wait in Jerusalem until the promise came, that is the Holy Spirit. And they waited. And it was on Pentecost that the Holy Spirit fell upon the disciples, and the church became a spirit-filled, spirit-baptized body. That's also the reason there were so many in Jerusalem that day. You remember, after the Spirit fell, they spilled out into the streets and they began to preach the gospel in many different languages because there were folks from all over the Roman world, Jews, come to Jerusalem for the festival of Pentecost, the Pilgrim Festival, remember. And they heard the gospel. All these visitors in Jerusalem heard the gospel of Jesus being proclaimed in their native languages, in the languages they spoke at home. And they knew it was of God. They knew it was of God, that these Galileans could somehow communicate to them in their own native languages. That was the power of the Holy Spirit, and it occurs on the day of Pentecost. So anyway, here in Acts chapter 16, we see this second of the pilgrim festivals, the Festival of Weeks, the Festival of Harvest, the Festival of Pentecost. This is a time of great joy in the life of Israel, as all worship should be a time of great joy for us. Join us tomorrow as we continue our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. And tomorrow we'll be looking at the Festival of Tabernacles. The Festival of Tabernacles. So join us for that.